Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It happened on a Thursday night at the new fitness club downtown, the one with glass walls and mirrors that never stop reflecting you back. She was in her Lululemon leggings, laughing at something her trainer said, her hand brushing his arm like it had every right to be there. I stood behind the reception desk, waiting for her to notice me. She didn't. When she finally turned, her smile felt delayed, polite, not hers anymore. "Hey," she said lightly, like we hadn't shared a decade together. Then she looked at the trainer, Jake, and added, "This is Ethan, my husband." The pause between my and husband was long enough for me to feel it. I didn't say anything, just nodded. She laughed again, that soft, performative sound that used to belong to me. And then, as Jake walked away, she said the line that froze everything. "You're too much sometimes, Ethan. You don't always have to be so intense." Too much. That phrase followed me home. It was still there as I sat in the kitchen, the smell of burned coffee mixing with silence. She came in later, humming, scrolling through her Apple Watch notifications like nothing had shifted. When I asked if she wanted dinner, she just said, "I already ate at Whole Foods with Jake after training." We talked about recovery meals. She said it so casually it sounded innocent. But I knew the tone. I design buildings for a living. I can feel when a structure is about to crack. That night, she fell asleep beside me, smelling like eucalyptus oil and someone else's attention. I stared at the ceiling and realized something quiet. She hadn't looked at me in weeks, not really. Every conversation was a formality, every touch replaced by yoga posts and gym playlists. I used to be the gravity of her world. Now I was just the background of her stories. In the morning, she kissed my cheek and said, "Don't wait up." She was already halfway out the door before I could respond. So I didn't. I stopped responding. And for the first time in years, the silence between us didn't feel like absence. It felt like design. I started noticing the details most people would miss. The way she lingered in the parking lot after her evening sessions. The way her gym bag stayed packed even on her supposed rest days. One night, her Apple Watch lit up at 11:47 p.m. while she slept beside me. The message preview said, "Proud of your progress today." It wasn't about fitness. It was about control. I didn't ask. I just watched. Architects don't tear down buildings. They study the cracks first. I looked through our shared calendar and saw more late training sessions. Her posts on Instagram turned into clips of stretches, laughter, close-ups of her trainer's hands adjusting her posture. People commented, "You two have great chemistry." She replied with a heart emoji. The next morning, she wore a new Lululemon set, white and unmarked. She said she got it for motivation. I just nodded, and something inside me went completely still. That's the moment it changed for me. Not the betrayal, but the clarity. I realized she was no longer here, not in the way that mattered. I stopped talking as much. I let her fill the silence with her new world. Protein shakes from Whole Foods, podcasts about self-awareness, long calls that ended with, "He understands how to challenge me." I didn't react. She didn't notice. The distance became architecture, clean lines, deliberate spacing. One evening, she came home glowing. She said Jake had suggested they enter a local fitness challenge together. I could tell she expected me to object, to argue, to make it about jealousy. I didn't. I said, "Sounds like you found your balance." Her smile faltered for a second, but she recovered quickly. After she went to bed, I walked through the house, room by room. Every corner still had a trace of me, the man who once built a life here. But it all felt redesigned, rebranded around her new reflection. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started transferring my architectural firm's files to a new drive. A quiet separation, brick by brick. She didn't know it yet, but I was already drawing new lines. Not in our home, in myself. And when I looked up from the screen, the silence was perfect. Not empty, just structured. A few weeks later, I found what I wasn't looking for. It started with a bank notification, small, almost harmless. A charge from a hotel near the gym, time-stamped for a Tuesday afternoon. She had told me she was teaching a private yoga session. My hand hovered over the screen longer than I'd like to admit. Architects don't need proof, they need alignment. Everything suddenly lined up. That night she came home late again, glowing from another stretch session. Her hair was damp, her cheeks bright. She tossed her Lululemon bag on the couch and kissed my forehead like a routine, not affection. She went upstairs, humming something upbeat, leaving a faint trace of new cologne in the air that wasn't mine. I sat there in the quiet, tracing invisible lines on the table with my finger. I didn't confront her. I didn't need a scene. Instead, I opened my laptop and started archiving everything: joint accounts, photos, files. I called my assistant the next morning and said I'd be working remotely for a while. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Understood." That day, I drove my Volvo XC60 through the city without a destination. The world looked different when you stopped trying to fix it. I parked near the waterfront, where the skyline cut through the fog like something half-finished. I sat there for hours, watching people rush by, runners, couples, the kind of faces that still believed in permanence. When I got home, she was already asleep. Her Apple Watch blinked faintly on the nightstand, counting steps, not moments. I stood there for a while, realizing that technology now knew more about her heartbeat than I did. The next morning, I didn't make coffee. I didn't wait for her to wake up. I just packed a small bag, work laptop, a few sketches, my headphones, and left for the office. I didn't say goodbye. Later that day, she texted, "Are you okay? You left early." I didn't reply. She sent another, "Don't be cold, Ethan." Cold? No. Precise. There's a difference between leaving and withdrawing. One is emotional. The other is structural. And that morning, I chose structure. I disappeared quietly. No announcement, no argument. Just absence. I moved into a small loft near my office. Bare walls, tall windows, concrete floors. It wasn't home, but it was mine. I left the house keys on the kitchen counter with no note. She'd understand eventually, though probably too late. The first morning there, I went to IHOP for breakfast. The waitress didn't know my name, didn't ask questions. Pancakes, black coffee, peace. I hadn't realized how loud my life had been until it stopped echoing. Every sound in that loft became intentional. Paper against wood, pencil against sketchbook. Silence, at last, had shape. She texted me all day. "Where are you? Why didn't you tell me? This isn't funny." Her words stacked up like missed calls from the past. I didn't answer. She was used to being heard immediately, to being the center of attention. Now, she was just sending messages into space. At night, she posted a photo on Instagram, her in her gym, stretching under neon lights, captioned, "Finding balance." People commented hearts and fire emojis. I just watched. The truth was, she wasn't finding balance. She was trying to perform it. A few days later, she showed up at my office. She didn't look angry, just lost. She asked my assistant if I was in. I was standing right there, behind the glass wall. I watched her looking around, scanning the room, pretending to be calm. My assistant said, "He's in a meeting." I wasn't, but I stayed still until she left. Later that night, she texted again, "Can we talk?" I typed a response, then deleted it. Instead, I sent one line. "You said I was too much. Now you have less than nothing." The message delivered instantly. No typing bubble appeared. I put the phone face down, leaned back, and exhaled. For the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt precision. Every withdrawal had been calculated. Not revenge, not escape. Just a blueprint for distance. And somewhere between her silence and my stillness, I realized this was the version of me she could never reach again. Jake's face showed up in her feed more often now. Videos of them training, laughing, collaborating. It wasn't about fitness anymore. It was about attention. Every caption was a performance of independence. Every post a disguised plea for validation. I watched quietly, not as a husband, but as an observer of architecture gone wrong. She was building a facade, and I knew how those collapse. While she performed, I adjusted. My firm had just landed a renovation project downtown, a chance to build something from ruin. Fitting. I spent my nights sketching in the loft, music low, my mind sharp. I stopped checking her messages. I stopped reacting. Even my friends noticed. One said, "You're colder lately." I smiled. It wasn't coldness. It was alignment. One afternoon, a mutual friend mentioned seeing Jake arguing with the gym manager. Something about client boundaries, inappropriate behavior. I didn't ask for details. I just let the information settle. Every structure carries its own weakness. Some fall without a push. That night, I sent an anonymous email to the fitness club's HR department. Nothing emotional, just facts, dates, screenshots, timestamps from her posts. Professional tone, no signature. I hit send and closed my laptop. Days later, she called. Her voice was shaking, pretending not to. They suspended Jake, she said. Some complaint about crossing lines. It's ridiculous. I listened, said nothing. She kept talking, her voice cracking at the edges. People are saying things. My clients, they're asking questions. Still, I didn't respond. Silence, I've learned, can be more powerful than truth. She used to thrive on being seen. Now, the same eyes that admired her were watching with judgment. A few nights later, I drove past the gym. The lights were dim, her car alone in the parking lot. She sat inside, head in her hands, staring at nothing. For a moment, I almost stopped. Then I realized, this was her lesson, not mine. As I drove away, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Calm, detached, controlled. She had chosen movement. I had chosen stillness. And now, the world was finally catching up to both of us. News spreads fast when it smells like scandal. Within a week, Jake's name was whispered across every treadmill and locker room in that gym. Unprofessional. Inappropriate. Crossed the line. No one mentioned her directly, but everyone knew. I didn't need to see it to understand how the silence around her had changed. It was the kind that burns, not comforts. She started posting less. The confident captions turned vague. Pictures of smoothies from Whole Foods replaced her smiling gym videos. The camera no longer lingered on her body. It hovered on empty spaces, half-lit rooms, late-night reflections. I watched from a distance, not out of nostalgia, but out of observation. I wanted to see how people unravel when the applause stops. One evening, I ran into one of her friends outside a cafe. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, like I was a ghost she didn't expect to meet in daylight. She said quietly, "She's not doing great, Ethan." She thought he was different. I just nodded. There was nothing to add. That same night, my phone buzzed again. Her message said, "Everyone's talking. You probably think I deserve it." I stared at the screen for a long time before locking it. Deserve had nothing to do with it. Cause and effect, that's all it ever was. In the days that followed, she showed up at my loft building. She didn't come in, just stood across the street, like she was waiting for me to notice. I saw her through the window, arms folded, hair pulled back, still wearing that same white Lululemon set. It looked out of place now, like armor that no longer fit. I didn't go down. I didn't wave. I simply watched her turn away and disappear into the crowd. The next morning, I walked to IHOP again. Same order, same quiet. Outside the window, the world kept moving, unaware of what had been lost. I sipped my coffee and realized something. She had built her life around movement, but she never learned how to stand still. And now, standing still was all she could do. Weeks passed, and the silence between us hardened into something permanent. I didn't block her number. I didn't need to. Her messages had lost their shape. They came less often now, just fragments of guilt, apologies that didn't ask for answers. I read them the way an architect studies ruins, not to rebuild, but to understand how they fell. She started showing up online differently. Gone were the yoga routines and smiling posts. In their place were long captions about healing, forgiveness, and learning to be alone. But I could see through the language. It wasn't self-awareness. It was panic dressed as philosophy. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch myself scrolling back through old photos. Not of her, but of my work, blueprints, designs, half-finished models. The order, the geometry, it grounded me. Every line meant something. Every space had purpose. I realized how much energy I'd wasted trying to bring symmetry to someone who thrived on chaos. One Friday, she called from an unknown number. I let it ring until it stopped. Then came the text. "I just need to see you. Please." I didn't answer. She sent another. "You don't even care anymore, do you?" I looked at it for a moment, then muted the conversation. That weekend, I drove the car out to the coast. The weather was sharp, the kind of cold that clears your mind. I stood on the pier watching the horizon fade into the fog, and for the first time, I didn't think about her. I thought about structure, silence, the beauty of things that no longer required repair. When I got back to the loft, there was a small package at my door. Inside was a photo, our wedding picture framed. No note, just the image of two people smiling, unaware of the blueprint they'd eventually destroy. I set it against the wall, face down. In the new version of my life, there was no room for decoration, only foundation. It was early October when she finally came to see me. No warning, no message beforehand. Just a knock at the loft door, soft, hesitant. I opened it to find her standing there, wrapped in a loose gray hoodie, eyes swollen from what looked like days of crying. For a second, she didn't speak. She just looked around, scanning the empty space, like she couldn't believe I'd built a life without her in it. "You really left?" she said quietly. Her voice trembled in a way I'd never heard before. I didn't respond. She stepped inside, her gaze moving across the unfinished sketches pinned to the walls, the bare table, the folded blankets. Everything in that room was deliberate. No excess, no noise. She seemed small in it, like someone out of place in their own memory. She said she'd ended things with Jake, that he'd moved on easily, found another client, another story. She said she'd realized what she lost. I let her talk. The words poured out. Remorse, confusion, nostalgia. But underneath it all, I heard something else. Regret, not love. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of herself that existed when I was still orbiting her world. When she asked if I hated her, I shook my head. Hate takes energy, and I didn't waste energy anymore. I told her calmly. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. She blinked, like the sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. She asked if I could ever forgive her, if we could start again. I walked to the window and looked out at the city, glowing under the evening haze. It wasn't revenge that kept me silent. It was peace. I had rebuilt my life around stillness, and I wasn't about to let noise back in. When I turned back, she was crying quietly, not begging, just breaking. I wanted to feel something, but all I felt was distance. That was the moment I knew I hadn't lost her. She had simply lost access to me. After that night, she didn't leave right away. She lingered, like someone waiting for a verdict. She tried to fill the silence between us with memories. Our first apartment, the road trips, the morning coffees we used to share. But those stories belonged to different people. I wasn't him anymore, and she wasn't the woman who used to trace constellations on my skin when she couldn't sleep. She looked around the loft and said, almost to herself, "It feels empty here." I told her it wasn't empty, it was balanced. Every object had a place, every line a reason. She used to say I was obsessed with control. Now she was standing inside the peace she used to mistake for distance. The next few days, she called often, sometimes just to hear if I'd answer. I didn't. When she realized I wasn't going to play the old roles anymore, the listener, the fixer, the one who filled the silence, something in her started to unravel. Her posts turned darker, stripped of pretense. No hashtags, no filters. Just raw fragments of a woman who no longer knew where to stand. A mutual friend mentioned she'd left the gym. Apparently, the new clients didn't trust her after the rumor spread. Even her sponsors had gone quiet. The girl who once built her identity on attention now lived in the shadow of her own reputation. I saw her again by accident a week later, outside Whole Foods. She was standing by the parking lot, phone in hand, scrolling without focus. When she saw me, her face froze. She didn't come over. She just stood there, like a ghost caught between recognition and regret. Driving away, I realized something sharp. She hadn't been punished. She'd simply been left alone long enough to meet herself. That night, I walked through the loft, turned off every light, and sat by the window. The city hummed below, alive and indifferent. Somewhere out there, she was learning the one truth I already knew. When you lose the person who grounded you, the silence that follows isn't punishment. It's consequence. It took months before the silence settled into something that felt like permanence. She stopped reaching out. The world around her moved on, and so did I. I wasn't running from her anymore. I was just living in a space she no longer existed in. My work grew sharper, more deliberate. The lines I drew carried a weight they hadn't before. Clients said they could feel something in the new designs. They didn't know it was peace disguised as precision. One cold Sunday morning, I went back to IHOP. The same table by the window, the same black coffee, the same quiet hum of strangers. Outside, the air was pale and still. I remember thinking how rare it was, that kind of silence, the kind you don't need to fill. When I stepped outside, I saw her car parked across the street. She was sitting inside, looking at me through the windshield. No movement, no words. Just two people divided by everything unsaid. After a moment, she got out. She didn't look polished like before. No makeup, no brand names, just a worn hoodie and tired eyes. She walked over slowly, and for the first time, she didn't try to explain. She just said, "You were right. You weren't too much. I was too little." The sentence hung there, fragile, trembling in the cold. I didn't respond. I just nodded once. She looked at me as if waiting for something, a sign, a word, any opening. But there was nothing left to offer. I had already forgiven her in the quietest way possible, by not carrying her mistake anymore. When she finally turned to leave, she stopped and said softly, "Do you ever think about us?" I met her eyes and said, "Sometimes, but only as a reminder of what I won't return to." She nodded, tears forming but never falling. Then she walked back to her car, started the engine, and drove off into the gray. I watched until the sound faded, then looked down at my reflection in the cafe window. I didn't see the man she once called too much. I saw a man rebuilt, measured, steady, untouchable. And for the first time, I understood. I hadn't disappeared. I had simply stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.